Laura sat by the kitchen window watching the rain fall in thin silver lines. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her husband, Richard, had been away on business for almost 2 weeks. And though she had grown used to his absences, the emptiness still settled deep in her chest. She had filled her days with chores, phone calls, and music playing softly in the background. But none of it could drown out the silence that seemed to grow louder each evening. She was lost in her thoughts, when the sound of the front door opening made her heart jump. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then came a voice, warm, familiar, and unexpected. Aunt Laura. She turned in surprise. Standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain, was a tall young man with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. It took her a few seconds to recognize him. "Ethan," she said, her voice unsure but touched with a smile. Ethan, her husband's nephew, nodded, grinning sheepishly. "I hope it's okay that I dropped by. I was driving through town and thought I'd stop to see you. It's been forever." Laura quickly went to him, taking his bag and ushering him inside. "Of course, it's okay. Goodness, look at you. You've grown so much since I last saw you." She fetched a towel and handed it to him. "You must be freezing." He laughed as he dried his hair. "A bit. I didn't expect the rain to hit this hard." When she looked at him again, Laura realized how much he had changed. The shy, lanky teenager she remembered was gone. Ethan was now a man taller, confident, his voice deeper, his eyes calm but observant. It startled her how time had moved so quickly as she poured him a cup of hot tea. The small kitchen filled with the gentle sound of rain against the windows. "So, what brings you here?" she asked. "I just needed a break," he said, wrapping his hands around the mug. "Boston's been a lot. I finished my degree, started work, and I guess I just needed some quiet." He smiled softly. "And you always made this house feel like home." Her heart warmed at that. "Well, you can stay as long as you like. The guest room's ready. Richard's away for work, but he'll be glad to see you when he's back." Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Thanks, Aunt Laura. I didn't want to be a bother." "You're not," she said gently. "It's nice to have company for a change." As the evening passed, the two of them sat by the fireplace talking about everything's job. Her garden, family news, memories from years ago. It felt natural, almost too easy, as if they'd simply picked up where they left off. Laura found herself laughing more than she had in months. Ethan had a calm presence, an easy humor that made her forget the quiet loneliness that had taken root in her days. When he spoke about his struggles with work and the pressure of being on his own, she listened with genuine care. "You're doing fine," she told him. "You've always been hardworking. You just need to trust yourself more." He looked at her then, and there was something soft in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. "You always know what to say," he murmured. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Not awkward, but warm-like to people who didn't need words to understand each other. Later that night, after Ethan went to his room, Laura stayed by the window, watching the rain again. But it didn't feel as lonely anymore. The sound was gentler now, like a song. She thought of the way Ethan had smiled, how grown-up he seemed, and she couldn't help but feel a quiet pride if seeing him reminded her of something pure and hopeful she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was just happiness, just nostalgia. Yet deep down, there was a stirring she couldn't quite explain it. Tiny spark of feeling she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and the house felt alive again. Ethan was already in the kitchen making coffee. "Morning," he said with a grin. "I hope you don't mind. Di found the beans." Laura laughed. "Of course not. It's nice to have someone else using the kitchen." They had breakfast together, talking easily, as if they'd been doing it for years. He helped her with the groceries, fixed the squeaky screen door, and even joined her in the garden later that day. Every small gesture, every shared smile, brought a soft warmth back into her life. Still, as evening fell, Laura caught herself thinking too much. She tried to remind herself that Ethan was family, that her husband would be home soon, that this was just a visit. But when she heard his laughter echoing through the hallway, when she saw how easily he fit into the rhythm of her days, she couldn't help but feel something gentle awaken inside her. That night, she stood by the window again, staring at the quiet street below. She thought of how empty the house had been before Ethan arrived. How she had almost stopped expecting anything new to happen. His unexpected visit had reminded her that life could still surprise her. That warmth could still find its way back into her heart. Even after years of silence, she sighed softly, a faint smile playing on her lips. Maybe it was just nice to be seen, again to be heard. That was all. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, fading into the night. Laura closed the curtains and turned off the lights. As she walked down the hallway, she heard faint music coming from the guest room, Ethan playing something gentle on his guitar. The melody drifted through the air, calm and familiar, like a memory she hadn't realized she missed, for the first time in a long time. Laura slept peacefully, but deep inside, something had shifted, a quiet whisper she couldn't name, a feeling she wasn't ready to understand. The house was no longer silent, but her heart was louder than ever. And somewhere between the rain, the laughter, and the stillness of the night, she sensed that this unexpected visit might change more than just her days. It might awaken the parts of her that had been asleep for far too long. She didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. The next few days passed with a strange kind of ease. The quiet that once weighed on Laura's home now felt alive with sound, coffee cups clinking, laughter echoing down the hallway, the low hum of conversation that filled the air. Ethan settled in quickly, as if he'd always belonged there. He helped her with small chores, fixed things around the house, and joined her for morning walks through the neighborhood. Every moment felt simple, natural. Yet something inside Laura began to stir in ways she didn't expect. She told herself it was nice to have someone around, that it was only the comfort of company after so many lonely evenings. But deep down, she felt something warmer, something she hadn't felt in years. Ethan had a calm energy about him. He listened when she spoke, laughed easily, and carried himself with quiet confidence. He reminded her of a time when she and Richard had been like that, close, lighthearted, full of dreams. Now, when Richard called from his trips, their conversations were short, polite, and tired. The connection that once held them together had faded into routine. One afternoon, the sun was bright, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint. Laura and Ethan were outside repainting the old wooden fence that had been peeling for months. They worked side by side, their hands moving in rhythm. The simple act of doing something together felt unexpectedly pleasant as they painted. Their conversation turned personal. Ethan spoke about his struggles living alone in the city, the pressure of work, the emptiness of coming home to a silent apartment. Laura listened quietly. "It's not easy when life feels too big," she said softly. "You think you should have everything figured out, but most of the time, you're just trying to stay steady." He looked at her, his eyes full of respect. "You always make things sound simple," he said. "You've got this calm about you. It feels safe." The words caught her off guard. She smiled awkwardly and dipped her brush into the paint. "Maybe I've just learned how to stay calm when things aren't." As she bent down to paint the lower boards, his arm brushed hers. It was a small, accidental touch, but it sent a strange warmth through her chest. For a second, she froze. Their eyes met just briefly, but long enough for her to feel something unspoken pass between them. She quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her work. "You missed a spot," she said, her voice unsteady but playful. He chuckled. "Guess I did." The moment passed, but it lingered in her mind. That evening, as the light faded and the house grew quiet again, Laura found herself thinking about it. It was an attraction, not exactly. It was something gentler, more confusing. She realized it wasn't Ethan himself who unsettled her, was what his presence reminded her of. A feeling she thought she'd lost, the feeling of being noticed, appreciated, understood. Later that night, Ethan joined her on the porch. The sky was fading into deep blue, the air cool with the scent of rain. "You always sit out here?" he asked. "Almost every night," she replied. "It's the quietest place in the world." He leaned against the railing. "I can see why Uncle Richard loves this place. It feels like time slows down here." Laura nodded but said nothing. Richard used to sit beside her on this very porch, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. Now, he barely noticed when she stepped outside. After a while, Ethan spoke again, his voice low. "You ever miss how things used to be?" The question made her heart tighten. "Every day," she admitted. "But missing something doesn't always mean you can get it back." He looked at her for a moment, as if wanting to say more, but didn't. Instead, he nodded quietly and stared at the trees swaying in the distance. The silence between them was soft, not uncomfortable, but filled with quiet understanding. The next morning, the weather turned gray and cool. Laura stood in the kitchen making coffee when Ethan walked in, still half asleep. His hair was messy, his voice rough from just waking up. "You're up early," he said. "I always am," she replied with a small smile. "Old habit." He poured himself coffee and leaned on the counter, watching her move about the kitchen. "You do a lot around here. Uncle Richard's lucky." Her smile faded just slightly. "I suppose," she said. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't sound convinced." She paused, then sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if he even notices anymore. I know he works hard, but lately it feels like we're just two people sharing a roof." Ethan's eyes softened. "That must be hard." Laura shrugged lightly, trying to brush it off. "It happens. Marriage isn't what people imagine it to be. It's not always love songs and flowers. Sometimes it's silence and distance." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his cup. "Still," he said finally, "I think love shouldn't disappear like that." "Not completely." His words lingered long after he left the kitchen. Later that day, Laura caught herself watching him from the window as he worked outside, fixing a loose hinge on the gate. He was patient, focused, thoughtful. She realized she hadn't seen that kind of quiet effort in a long time, not from Richard, not from anyone. And in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Something that scared her a little. That night she tried to sleep but couldn't. The rain began again, soft and steady. She sat up in bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. Her thoughts drifted to the sound of Ethan's voice, his easy laugh, his kind words. She wasn't in love with him. She knew that, but she couldn't deny that he had awakened something in her. It wasn't desire. It was the ache of remembering who she used to be, the woman who loved deeply, who felt alive, who believed in connection. Ethan had only reminded her that such feelings once existed. And now, in the quiet of her room, she realized how much she missed that part of herself. When morning came, she found him at the table, writing something in a small notebook. He looked up and smiled. "Morning," he said, as if nothing in the world was strange. She smiled back, trying to steady her heart. "Morning, Ethan." They shared breakfast, simple and calm, just like every other day. But beneath the surface, Laura felt the quiet pulse of something she didn't want to name. It wasn't about falling for someone new. It was about waking up after years of emotional sleep. Ethan didn't belong to her, and she knew he would leave soon. But his presence had already changed something inside her. He had reminded her of warmth, laughter, and what it meant to truly feel again, and though she didn't know it yet, this realization would lead her to face the truth about her own life and the love she thought had faded forever. When Richard finally came home, the rhythm of the house changed again. Laura felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, the dinners, the quiet conversations that ended too soon, the distance that filled their shared space. Richard hugged Ethan politely and asked about his work and studies, but his tone was distracted. His mind was already on emails and travel plans. Laura watched the two men talk, noticing how different they were, Richard with his tired eyes and restless phone checking, Ethan with his calm voice and patient smile. The contrast was impossible to ignore. That evening, Richard excused himself after dinner to make some work calls. Ethan offered to help clean up, and soon it was just the two of them in the kitchen. The faint clinking of dishes breaking the silence. Laura could feel the tension in the air, something quiet but heavy. Like a thought neither of them wanted to speak aloud. Ethan glanced at her while drying a plate. "He's busy, huh?" She nodded. "Always has been." "You don't seem happy when he's around," Ethan said carefully. His tone wasn't accusing. It was soft, almost protective. Laura froze for a second, then sighed. "It's not that simple. Marriage isn't always happiness. It's endurance sometimes." Ethan put the plate down and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "But you deserve to be seen. You deserve to feel something real, not just stay because it's easier." His words hit deeper than she expected. She turned away, pretending to wipe the counter. "You're young, Ethan. You think love is always supposed to feel alive. But life has its quiet seasons." He stepped a little closer, his voice low. "Maybe so. But I don't think love should ever make you feel forgotten." The room felt smaller then, the air thick with things unsaid. Laura's heart was pounding, not from fear, but from realization. Ethan wasn't trying to tempt her. He was showing her something she had buried long ago, the belief that she still mattered. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "You should get some rest," she said softly. "It's late." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Aunt Laura." When he left, Laura stood still for a long moment, her hand trembling slightly against the counter. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the way he saw her, or the way she almost wished he didn't. The next few days were quiet, but the silence between her and Ethan felt charged. They spoke politely, helped with chores, but there was an invisible line between them, now clear but fragile. Laura tried to stay busy. She told herself it was just admiration, just confusion. But every time she caught his eyes lingering a moment too long, every time she felt the warmth of his presence nearby, something inside her stirred that she couldn't entirely silence. One evening, the three of them had dinner together. Richard talked about his next trip, explaining flight schedules and meetings. Laura nodded when needed, smiling faintly, but her mind felt far away. Across the table, Ethan stayed mostly quiet, only speaking when spoken to. There was a sadness in his expression, like he wanted to say something but knew he shouldn't. After dinner, Richard excused himself to take another call, leaving Laura and Ethan to clear the table again. This time, neither spoke at first. The clatter of plates and the running water filled the silence until Ethan finally said quietly, "You've changed these past days." Laura looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" "You seem lighter," he said, "but also sadder, like you're remembering something you lost." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I am," she whispered. "I've said," took a deep breath. "You love him. I know you do. But love shouldn't hurt like this." The honesty in his voice broke something inside her. She turned away, gripping the edge of the sink. "Please don't," she said softly. "Don't make me think about it." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean." She shook her head, cutting him off. "No, you're right. I don't know what to do with it." Their eyes met again, and for a brief, fleeting second, it felt like time stopped. There was no storm, no chaos, just quiet understanding. Two souls standing too close to a truth neither wanted to face. Then Laura stepped back, her voice steady again. "You should go to bed, Ethan. We both need rest." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Good night." When he left, Laura leaned against the counter, her heart heavy. She wasn't in love with him. It wasn't that. What she felt was something deeper awakening, a reminder that she could still feel seen and alive. But she also knew the danger of those emotions. She was a married woman, and Ethan was family. Whatever she was feeling, it had to stay buried. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Richard was asleep beside her, his breathing steady and distant. The space between them felt miles wide. She wanted to reach out, to feel something, connection, warmth. Anything but her hand froze halfway. She turned away instead, tears forming quietly in her eyes. The next morning, the house was still. Laura found Ethan outside, standing by the garden. He looked tired, lost in thought. "I'm leaving soon," he said quietly, without turning. She felt her heart sink. So soon. "Yeah, I think it's better," he said. before things get complicated. Laura didn't argue. She only nodded, her throat tight with words she couldn't say. I understand. He finally looked at her. You've been kind to me, Aunt Laura. More than you know. She smiled faintly. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That's worth more than you realize. They stood there for a moment, silent, the wind moving gently through the trees. Then Ethan turned to go, his footsteps slow and uncertain. Laura watched him walk away, her chest aching. She knew it was right. She knew nothing more could happen. But still, it felt like saying goodbye to a piece of herself she had just rediscovered. That evening, Richie asked casually, When's Ethan leaving? Tomorrow, Laura said. Good kid, he replied without looking up from his laptop. Reminds me of myself at that age. Laura smiled sadly. Yes, she murmured. In some ways, he does. Later that night, she stood at the window again, watching the moonlight spread across the empty road. She knew she would miss the sound of Ethan's laughter, the light he brought into the quiet corners of her days. But more than that, she feared the silence that would follow. Still, she told herself this was the right choice. She had come too close to a line she couldn't cross. As the rain began to fall softly again, Laura whispered to herself, It's time to remember who I am. She didn't know yet that Ethan's departure would not only leave a silence, but also plant the seed of change. For the first time in years, she didn't feel numb, she felt awake. And sometimes, that awakening itself can change everything. The morning Ethan left, the house felt heavier than usual. The rain had stopped, and sunlight fell through the windows, warm but hollow. Laura stood by the doorway, watching as Ethan packed the last of his things into his car. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt unnecessary and maybe too dangerous. When he turned to her, his smile was soft but tired. Thank you for letting me stay, Aunt Laura, he said. These past days meant a lot. She nodded, forcing a small smile. You're always welcome here, Ethan. Take care of yourself. He hesitated for a moment, then added quietly, You too. When he drove away, Laura watched until his car disappeared at the curve of the road. The sound of the engine faded, leaving behind a stillness that sank deep into the walls of the house. She took a deep breath and stepped back inside. Everything looked the same furniture, the same soft hum of the refrigerator, but it didn't feel the same. Something inside her had shifted. Richard was on another call in his office, his voice echoing faintly through the hall. Yes, I'll be in Chicago by Monday, he said, his tone businesslike, detached. Laura paused at the doorway and watched him for a second. He didn't notice her standing there. He rarely did anymore. She turned away and went into the kitchen. The mug Ethan had used that morning still sat on the counter, his fingerprints faintly visible on the handle. She picked it up, washed it, and placed it carefully in the cabinet. But even as she did, her thoughts kept returning to his words, his laughter, the way he had looked at her like she mattered. It wasn't love she felt for him, it was remembrance. He had reminded her of the woman she used to be before life became dull and distant. That afternoon, Laura went out to the garden. The air was cool and the sky was covered in thin clouds. She looked at the fence they had painted together. It was smooth, even perfect. For the first time in a long while, she noticed how bright the flowers looked. Everything around her seemed alive, as if touched by something new. When Richard finally stepped outside after his call, he found her there, kneeling in the dirt, trimming the edges of the flower bed. You've been busy, he said, glancing around. She looked up at him, brushing soil from her hands. Just keeping the place alive, she replied. He gave a small laugh. You always do. His tone was distracted again. But there was a hint of guilt in his eyes, like he knew she had been holding everything together while he was away. Do you remember when we used to sit out here during the rain? She asked suddenly. Richard blinked. It's been a while, he said. We haven't done that in years. Maybe we should, she said quietly. Sometimes it's nice to just stop for a bit. He looked at her curiously, as if seeing her properly for the first time in a long time. Then he nodded. All right. After dinner, that evening, they sat on the porch together, just like they used to. The rain began again, light and steady, tapping softly on the wooden railing. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty this time. It was gentle, reflective. Laura sipped her tea and glanced at her husband. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his shoulders tired. But beneath it all, she could still see the man she had once fallen in love with. Maybe time and distance had buried that love, but it was still there, waiting. Do you ever think we lost ourselves somewhere? She asked. Richard frowned slightly. Maybe we did. I guess I got too caught up in work. I didn't realize how quiet it had gotten here. She nodded. It happens. Life takes over and you forget what really matters. He turned toward her. What made you think about this? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Someone reminded me that love needs care, that it fades only if we stop looking after it. Richard didn't ask who. Maybe he didn't need to. He just nodded slowly. You're right. For a moment, they sat there in silence again, watching the rain slide down the porch steps. Then, unexpectedly, Richard reached over and took her hand. It felt unfamiliar at first. His touch was heavier, rougher, but it was also real. Laura looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. It's not too late, is it? She whispered. He shook his head. No, he said softly. It never is. The rain grew stronger, but neither of them moved. The world around them blurred slightly, and in that moment, the years of distance began to melt away. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the same as before, but it was a start. Later that night, after Richard had gone to bed, Laura sat by the window again. The air smelled of rain and earth. She thought of Ethan one last time, not with longing, but with quiet gratitude. He had entered her life unexpectedly, stayed only a short while, yet managed to awaken something she had forgotten, her capacity to feel deeply, to care, to hope. He hadn't come to steal her heart. He had come to remind it how to beat again. Laura whispered a small prayer of thanks to the universe, to fate, to whoever had sent Ethan her way at the right moment. Then she turned off the lamp and went to bed beside her husband. In the days that followed, small changes began to appear. Richard started joining her for breakfast again, asking about her day. They took evening walks after dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes just walking in silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Laura, that was enough. One weekend, while cleaning the porch, she found an old photo album. Inside was a picture of her and Richard from their early years, smiling, young, full of life. She laughed softly and showed it to him. He smiled too, shaking his head. We were just kids. We still are, she teased. Just older ones. They laughed together, and in that sound, Laura felt something heal. Weeks later, when she received a postcard from Ethan, her heart warmed. It was simple, just a picture of Boston and a few words written neatly. Thank you for everything. I hope you're happy. Laura smiled and placed the postcard inside that same photo album. Between the pictures of her and Richard, it belonged there not as a memory of temptation, but as a reminder of rediscovery. That night, as she and Richard sat outside watching the sunset, she felt peaceful. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft gold and pink. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in silence or longing for something missing. She felt content, grounded, and quietly grateful for the journey that had brought her here. Love, she realized, doesn't disappear, only hides behind the noise of everyday life. Sometimes it just needs a small reminder, an unexpected visitor to bring it back into the light as the last bit of sunlight faded. Laura reached for Richard's hand again. This time it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like home, and in that quiet moment, her heart didn't ache anymore. It remembered and it finally found peace.